Derek Cole gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as his Tesla crept through the winding streets of Stonebrick Meadows. The soft hum of the electric motor barely interrupted the quiet morning air. Sunlight filtered through the canopies of well-manicured trees, casting shadows over cobblestone sidewalks. Every house here looked like it belonged on the cover of an architecture magazine. Polished brick facades, iron-gated porches, white shutters trimmed with care. It was the kind of neighborhood that whispered prestige, not loudly declared it. He pulled into the driveway of 414 Stonebrick Lane, his new home. A two-story colonial with a wraparound porch, navy blue shutters, and a freshly mulched garden bed that still smelled of pine. The house was perfect, not just on paper, not just in the listing photos. It felt perfect. It was his, and it had taken everything to get here. Derek stepped out of the car, his polished Oxfords crunching the gravel underfoot. The early spring air carried a chill, but he barely noticed it. His eyes scanned the house with a quiet reverence. This wasn't just a house. It was a milestone. The finish line to a race most people didn't even know he'd been running. Born and raised in inner-city Detroit, Derek had clawed his way out of generational hardship, a full scholarship to Howard, nights eating ramen while studying for CFA exams. Years of proving himself in boardrooms where he was the only black man in a sea of gray suits and Harvard pedigrees. He'd lost count of how many times he was mistaken for the intern, the assistant, or worse, the client's driver. But none of that mattered now. Not here. Not today. The moving truck rolled up minutes later. Two young men hopped out and began unloading the labeled boxes: kitchen, master bedroom, office, books. Derek helped, of course. He wasn't the type to stand by and watch. The porch slowly filled with his life, one box at a time. As he carried a crate of photo frames to the front steps, he paused, something tugging at his peripheral vision. Across the street, behind a lace curtain. Movement. Eyes. Just a flicker. Then gone. Derek frowned slightly, shrugged it off. Just curious neighbors. He told himself. It's normal. New face in the neighborhood, and all. He waved in the general direction. No response. He walked back down the driveway, grabbing the next box. Laundry room. From the corner of his eye, he caught another glimpse. A man walking his golden retriever, slowing to a crawl as he passed. Not a smile, not a nod, just a prolonged stare. By noon, no one had stopped by. No one had come over to introduce themselves. No casserole, no polite welcome to the neighborhood, just silence. Derek was used to being the outsider. In business, in social settings, even in places he paid to be part of, but somehow this silence stung differently. It was quiet, yes, but not the peaceful kind you hoped for. It was the kind of silence that measured you. Still, he brushed it off. People probably just keep to themselves out here, he muttered aloud, dropping a box labeled living room on the floor. It's fine. Give it time. Inside, the house was already starting to feel like home. He'd set up the espresso machine, a few floor lamps, unrolled a rug, and leaned framed photos of his parents, his degree, and a faded photo of a childhood church group along the hallway wall. His mother would have been proud. He stood by the kitchen window, sipping a cup of freshly brewed coffee. The aroma was warm, comforting. The morning light caught the steam just right, like something out of a movie. Then, another movement. Outside, not from across the street this time. From the next door porch. An older woman, rigid posture, arms folded across a tan cardigan, her head slightly tilted, gaze locked in, no wave, no smile, just watching. Derek held her stare for a moment, gave a nod. Nothing. She turned and walked back into her house. He sighed and placed the mug down on the marble counter. Okay, he whispered to no one in particular. Guess the welcome wagon's out of service. But despite the unease creeping into his chest, Derek reminded himself why he was here. This house, this neighborhood, this moment, it was earned. It was deserved. It was his. And no awkward stares or tight-lipped neighbors were going to steal that from him. Not today. Not ever. The next morning began with birdsong and soft golden light, filtering through sheer curtains. Derek Cole stood at the kitchen sink, brushing coffee grounds from his hands, steam rising from a mug beside him. Outside, dew glistened on the trim lawn like a layer of diamonds. It looked like peace, but something about it still felt wrong. Not loudly wrong, not alarm bells or shouting wrong, but that quiet kind, the kind that sinks into your skin before you even know it's there. He turned away from the window and glanced around the kitchen. The move-in had gone smoothly. Most of the boxes were unpacked. The espresso machine hummed like a loyal companion. Music played faintly from a speaker in the corner. Miles Davis, subtle and slow. Derek was settling in, or at least trying to. He checked his phone. Still no missed calls. Still no welcome text from a neighbor. No knocks. No. Hey, we saw the moving truck. Need help. Kindness in Stonebrick Meadows, it seemed, was on back order. He grabbed his coffee and stepped onto the front porch. A soft breeze rustled the cherry blossom tree by the walkway. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed lazily. Everything looked as it should. But again, that feeling. He turned his head slowly, scanning the houses around him. There, to his left, second floor, beige colonial, lace curtain swaying just an inch too wide open. Eyes! Someone was watching. But the moment his gaze landed, the curtain fell back into place like a trapdoor. Whoever was had been fast. Practiced, even. He narrowed his eyes. It wasn't the first time. Last night, as he walked down the driveway to grab a late delivery, he had caught a flicker of movement in another window, diagonal across the street. No faces, just shadows behind fabric, peering out, pulling back. It was like the whole neighborhood was made of eyes without mouths. And it wasn't just the windows. That morning, while unpacking boxes in the garage, a woman had walked past with her corgi. She made eye contact. Her face shifted slightly. Surprise, maybe. And then just like that, her gaze dropped to the sidewalk. She kept walking. No smile. No wave. Not even a head nod. Derek let out a quiet breath through his nose. He had been here less than 24 hours, and already the pattern was unmistakable. He was being watched. Not greeted. Not welcomed. Watched. And not out of curiosity. Not like the new family moved in. Let's bake a pie kind of watch. No, this was colder. Stiffer. The kind of attention that came with evaluation. As if his mere presence had triggered a silent question among the neighbors. Does he belong here? He was used to it, in some ways. Being a black man in predominantly white spaces meant growing up an inner radar. Always aware where you stood, how you moved, who noticed. But this was different. This was organized, calculated, like the neighborhood itself had antibodies. He stepped off the porch and walked toward the curb, sipping his coffee slowly. Across the street, a man was watering his lawn. Tall, silver hair, polo tucked into pressed khakis. Derek gave him a polite nod. The man hesitated, then returned a curt nod, the kind that ended a conversation before it began, and turned back to his hedges. Behind him, another curtain twitched. Derek turned to look back at his house. It was beautiful, still perfect, but now, under this invisible surveillance, it felt vulnerable. He walked back up the porch steps, but paused just before going inside. His eyes scanned the house again. From the welcome mat to the porch light to the American flag gently swaying across the street. Something settled in his chest. He wasn't being paranoid. This wasn't in his head. There was something unspoken being communicated here. Not in words. Not in letters. But in glances, avoidance, absence. This community didn't need to say it out loud. The silence said it for them. You're not one of us. Derek stepped inside and closed the door gently behind him. He walked into the office room, sat down at his laptop, and opened a blank document. He didn't know what he was typing at first, but the words came. Day 1. No greetings. Eyes behind curtains. Tight smiles. No handshakes. Cold air, warm sunlight. Something's off. He saved the file under a folder called Observations. Then he closed the lid. He wasn't here to make enemies. But he also wasn't here to disappear. Whatever was happening in this pristine little community, Derek Cole wasn't going to ignore it. He was going to watch them right back. It was 8:03 a.m. when the knock came, sharp, deliberate, and not the kind of tap you'd expect from a neighbor bringing muffins. Derek Cole had just taken his first sip of coffee, the rich brew still warming his chest when the sound hit the front door like a gavel. He paused mid-step, mug halfway to the counter, and turned toward the hallway. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. No doorbell, no follow-up. He walked slowly, placed the cup down gently, and opened the door. There she stood, Glenda Cartwright, a tall, wiry woman in her mid-60s, dressed like someone who watched too much HGTV and took every note personally. Crisp beige cardigan, pearl earrings, straight-leg khakis pressed sharper than hospital sheets. Her posture was stiff, military almost, her face expressionless, except for the eyes. Her eyes had that practiced precision, like she was scanning a blueprint of his life. "Good morning," she said. Her tone clipped like she'd already said it 3 times today. "I'm Glenda Cartwright, president of the Stonebrick Meadows Homeowners Association." No smile, no warmth, just title. Derek blinked, surprised but composed. He extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Ms. Cartwright. I know who you are," she said, cutting him off as her eyes flicked past him into the foyer. She didn't shake his hand. A pause. Derek lowered his hand slowly, keeping his voice even. "Is everything all right?" "I just wanted to go over a few things with you," she said, pulling a thick packet of documents from a manila folder. It was stapled in the corner and clipped with a plastic tab labeled Stonebrick HOA Guidelines. "This outlines all our community standards," she added, thrusting the packet into his hands like a summons. Derek flipped through the pages. Lawn care requirements, exterior paint approvals, garbage bin times, mailbox uniformity, everything down to the acceptable wattage for porch lights. He nodded slowly. "Okay, thanks for this," he said. "I'll make sure to review it." But she wasn't finished. Her gaze shifted to the driveway, where the moving truck, half empty now, still sat parked under a large maple tree. "I assume you'll have that removed by this evening?" she asked, voice neutral but edged with authority. Derek raised an eyebrow. "I'm still unpacking. It'll be gone by tomorrow." She nodded once, as if logging the answer in a file. "Good. We like to maintain a certain standard here in Stonebrick." He didn't respond to that. He just watched her watching him. Then came the real sting. "I also noticed that your trash bins were placed at the curb last night," she said. "I didn't put them out," Derek said calmly. "They were already there when I moved in. Maybe the previous owners." Glenda pressed her lips into a tight line. "Regardless, please be mindful moving forward. We have rules for a reason." And just like that, she turned and started walking away. No goodbye. No welcome to the neighborhood. Just the back of her cardigan disappearing down the porch steps, clipboard swinging at her side like a sword she hadn't yet used. Derek closed the door slowly. Inside, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same as before. It felt louder now. He walked back into the kitchen and picked up his coffee. It had gone cold. He dumped it out, stood by the sink for a long minute, then opened the observations file on his laptop again. Day 2. HOA president arrived unannounced. No handshake. No introduction. Just rules. Eyes everywhere. I'm being watched and measured. He sat back, fingers steepled beneath his chin, and stared out the window. Across the street, another curtain shifted. Derek wasn't naive. He knew what this was. He knew exactly the game being played here. And Glenda Cartwright? She wasn't just some uptight old neighbor with too much time on her hands. She was the one holding the match, standing beside the gasoline. But what she didn't know yet, what no one here knew, was that Derek Cole was the wrong black man to try and burn. It started with paper. Not violence. Not shouting. Not vandalism. Just paper. Slipped neatly into the mailbox like it belonged there. Like it was just part of the routine. The first envelope was white. No logo. Just his name in block letters typed across the front. Derek Cole. Inside, a one-page letter from the Stonebrick Meadows HOA Violation Department, which, as Derek would later discover, was mostly just Glenda Cartwright with a clipboard and a printer. Violation, Notice number 001. Date, April 5th, 8:11 a.m. Subject, vehicle placement. Per HOA Code 2.1b, personal vehicles must be parked in the designated driveway area. The vehicle in question was observed slightly overlapping onto the sidewalk, obstructing pedestrian traffic. Please correct this immediately to avoid future penalties. Derek stared at the notice for a long minute. He thought back to the previous day. His black Lexus sedan had been parked exactly where the movers left it, halfway in, halfway out of the garage, because the garage was full of unpacked boxes. Pedestrian traffic? In Stonebrook? The sidewalks were still covered in cherry blossom petals. He folded the letter and placed it in the kitchen drawer. Let it go, he thought. Choose your battles. But 2 days later, another letter appeared. Same envelope. Same tone. Violation. Notice number 002. Date, April 7th, 9:46 a.m. Subject, lighting infraction. The porch light at your residence exceeds the maximum allowed brightness per HOA Guideline 3.4a. Lighting should be no more than 60 watts and warm in tone. Your fixture appears to emit a cool white glare not consistent with community aesthetics. He blinked. The light? The same porch light that came with the house? That hadn't been touched since closing day? He stepped outside that night and stared at the fixture. It looked fine. Normal. The house 2 doors down had a fluorescent blue LED strip blinking like a techno rave, but no one's writing letters about that. Still, he replaced the bulb with a lower wattage one, just in case. Compromise. Play it safe. That's what they say, right? But then came letter 3. Violation. Notice number 003. Date, April 9th, 7:55 a.m. Subject, lawn height violation. Your front lawn exceeds a maximum allowed grass height of 3.5 inches per HOA landscape standards. Failure to address this may result in fines or further disciplinary action. That one actually made Derek laugh. He had spent an hour of the day before with his new electric mower, carefully cutting and edging every blade. He'd even Googled best mowing patterns for curb appeal. It was meticulous. It was fresh. It smelled like effort. And yet violation. He stepped outside and looked at his lawn again. It was shorter than his neighbor's. He even pulled out a tape measure. 2.8 inches. But no one else had a letter stuck in their door. No one else was being watched this closely. It wasn't about light bulbs or grass. It was about him. That night, Derek sat on his back porch, sipping whiskey and staring out at the fading daylight. The soft rustling of trees made the world seem calm. But inside him, the tension coiled tighter. He didn't want to admit it yet, not fully, but he knew what this was becoming. This wasn't just an uptight HOA president enforcing rules. This was a pattern, a quiet campaign, a system disguised as civility. And the worst part? It was smart. None of the letters were outrageous enough to scream injustice. But when stacked together, they created weight. Psychological weight. The kind that wore you down over time. He opened his laptop again. Day 4. 3 violations. All nonsense. No neighbor has received the same scrutiny. I'm not imagining it. I'm not paranoid. This is targeted, measured, and quiet enough to stay under the radar. He stared at the blinking cursor. I think you want me to leave. And for a brief second, the thought lingered. Would that be easier? Would that be safer? But then he looked back at the porch light, the lawn, the car in the driveway. The moving boxes still scattered like memories unpacked. And he remembered the journey it took to get here. The long nights, the loans, the rejections, the insult behind closed doors. No, he wasn't leaving. Not without a fight. Not without making them say it out loud. If Glenda Cartwright wanted him gone, she was going to have to do more than hide behind fine print and wattage limits. She'd have to show her face. By the second week in Stonebrook Meadows, Derek Cole's mailbox had become a battlefield. Every morning, like clockwork, a new envelope would greet him. Sometimes it was already waiting when he stepped outside for his run, tucked under the red flag like a polite threat. Other times, it arrived mid-morning, slid in by an HOA representative he never saw, but always knew was watching. He didn't need to open them anymore to know what they were. He could recognize the weight, the way the envelope sealed too neatly, the mechanical tone of the printed name, Derek Cole. Inside, each letter wore the same mask, bureaucratic language dressed up in civility, wielding community standards like weapons. One day it was a position of his recycling bin. The next, it was the angle of his shutters. Then it was the reflectiveness of his mailbox number plate. The absurdity was almost impressive. It wasn't enforcement. It was erosion. Bit by bit, inch by inch. Derek knew what was happening now. This was a control loop, an endless cycle designed to drain him, not just of time or money, but of presence, of peace, of belonging. And unlike before, he wasn't guessing anymore. He had proof. One chilly morning, armed with his phone and a quiet sense of resolve, Derek walked the neighborhood, not in running shoes this time, but in business casual, the same way Glenda would if she were out inspecting. He took his time. He looked at every lawn, every porch, every trash bin left out too long, and what he found confirmed what he already knew in his bones. Violations, dozens of them, yards overgrown by 5 inches, broken shutters dangling like missing teeth, mold on siding, porch lights brighter than a football stadium. Some mailboxes even had numbers written in Sharpie. And yet, no letters, no warnings, no one else under surveillance. Only him, only the black man. Derek snapped photo after photo, date-stamped, geotagged, compiled in a folder labeled Stonebrick Standards. He wasn't angry, not visibly. He wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't calling anyone out. He was doing what people like Glenda didn't expect black men to do. He was watching back. That evening, Derek sat on his porch again, sipping a light beer, laptop on his knees. He drafted a message to the HOA board, polite, firm, professional. Dear board members, I've noticed what appear to be inconsistencies in the application of community guidelines. Attached is a sample collection of similar violations currently present throughout the neighborhood, none of which have received citations to my knowledge. I am requesting clarification on how enforcement is determined and whether a review process exists. Respectfully, Derek Cole, homeowner at 414 Stonebrick Lane. He clicked send, then leaned back, letting the breeze roll across his face. Down the street, a couple walked their golden retriever. They passed his house and glanced his way. The woman smiled, tight and brief. The man didn't. No conversation. No small talk. Just another pair of eyes in a neighborhood full of watchers. 2 days later, she returned. Glenda Cartwright. No knock this time. Just her presence. She stood at the base of his porch stairs like a ghost in daylight, clipboard in hand, expression perfectly neutral. Her cardigan was the same. The pearls, too, like she had been copied and pasted from a textbook titled How to Look Official, without saying anything real. Derek opened the door slowly, resting one arm against the frame. Something I can help you with, Miss Cartwright? He asked, voice calm. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes scanned behind him. Into the foyer, the kitchen, the furniture still in progress. Then, without invitation, she held out a printed form. This is a formal request for proof of homeownership, she said. We've received concerns. Derek took the paper, but didn't look at it. Concerns from who? Several residents, she replied, her tone syrupy tight. There have been questions about activity at this address. Different cars. Furniture deliveries at odd hours. Some worry this may be a rental in violation of HOA policy. Derek blinked once. Then he smiled. Not because it was funny, but because the line had finally revealed itself. So let me get this straight, he said, folding the paper. You're asking me, the only homeowner who's received 5 violations in 2 weeks, to prove I own this home? Glenda didn't flinch. It's standard policy in cases of non-compliance. Derek stepped forward slightly, voice still even. Have you asked anyone else on the street for their deed? She didn't respond. Because I just walked this neighborhood 2 days ago, he continued. And unless you miss the faded house numbers, the trash bin's still out, the plastic chairs from 1996. I'm not the only one out of compliance. Glenda's jaw tightened. Her fingers curled slightly around the clipboard. "We have discretion," she said, softly but coldly. "And I have records," Derek replied. He let the silence hang there between them. The breeze carried it, stretching it longer, until even the birds seemed to hush. Then he smiled again, sharper this time. "You want proof of ownership?" he said, stepping back toward the door. "It's public record. You're welcome to look it up. But if you prefer I print it out for you, I'd be happy to, along with a few other documents I've been working on." Glenda's mask cracked, just for a second, a flicker in the eyes, a quiver at the mouth. Then, quickly she recovered. "I'll inform the board," she said flatly. "Further action may be necessary." "I look forward to it," Derek said, and closed the door without another word. Behind it, his breath slowed, not because he was nervous, but because he realized something important. This was never about rules. It was about removal, and he was done playing by their quiet script. The sixth notice arrived on a Friday. This time, it came in a cream-colored envelope, hand-delivered and tucked carefully into Derek Cole's mailbox. No postage, no stamp, just his name in firm black ink, centered, confident, like it belonged. But it didn't. Nothing about the paper in his hand belonged in a neighborhood that claimed community as its foundation. He opened it slowly, already knowing what it would say. Formal request. Proof of homeownership. Per Section 5.3 of the Stonebrook Meadows HOA bylaws, all property owners must provide documentation when requested by the board in response to verified community concerns. Please submit your deed within 7 business days. Derek sat on his porch steps, the paper resting in his lap, his coffee cooling untouched beside him. He read the words twice, then a third time. Proof of homeownership. He let those 4 words settle in his chest like gravel. Heavy, scratching, stupid. He wasn't angry. Not yet, but he was tired, and tired carried weight. Later that day, at precisely 2:37 p.m., she came back, Glenda Cartwright, armed with a clipboard and the expression of someone pretending this wasn't personal. It always was. She didn't knock, just stood at the base of his porch steps, waiting like a hall monitor for a student to acknowledge her presence. Her beige blouse was perfectly pressed. Her pearl earrings caught the sunlight just so. But her eyes told a different story. They weren't there to check boxes. They were there to remind him who was in charge. Derek rose slowly from his chair, stepped outside, and leaned against the doorframe. His stance was relaxed. His voice, even, "Can I help you, Miss Cartwright?" Glenda glanced at the paper in her hands like it might justify her entire existence. "We received some concerns," she began. "Some of the residents have noticed activity." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Activity?" "Yes. Furniture deliveries. Multiple cars coming and going. Odd hours. There's been talk that you might be renting the property, which would be in violation of HOA regulations." Derek didn't respond right away. He just looked at her, steady, patient, because this was the moment he'd been waiting for, not hoping for, not welcoming, but preparing for. And now it had arrived, wrapped in HOA language, dressed in policy, disguised as concerns. "Let me get this straight," he said, folding his arms. "Because I've been moving furniture in and had family visiting. You think I'm illegally renting this house?" Glenda didn't flinch. "We're simply doing our due diligence." "No," Derek said quietly. "You're doing your targeting." Glenda shifted. "Sir, we ask all residents to comply with." "Did you ask the Millers next door for their deed when they moved in?" he asked. "Did you ask the Andersons 2 years ago when they renovated their porch?" Glenda's lips parted, but no sound came out. Derek pressed forward gently, not threatening but unmovable. "This is public record. You can pull it yourself with 2 clicks and a property ID. You don't need my permission. You don't need my cooperation. You just need to look." Glenda tried to maintain her composure. Her hands gripped the clipboard a little tighter. The line of her jaw stiffened, but her authority was slipping and she knew it. "I'd prefer if you submitted it directly," she said. Derek tilted his head slightly, studying her. "And if I don't?" Her smile was thin, almost condescending. Then I'll have to escalate this to board. That was it. The threat. Not a shout, not an accusation, but the exact phrase she wanted to say all along. If you don't obey, we'll make you leave. Derek took a long breath, then nodded once. I'll think about it, he said. Then he turned and walked back inside. He didn't slam the door. He didn't raise his voice. He just closed it with quiet finality. Behind that door, Derek stood still for a moment. He wasn't rattled. He wasn't confused. He was done playing defense. Because that interaction wasn't just about the deed. It was a playbook move, the same script that had been used against men like him for decades. Make them prove they belong. Make them carry the burden of legitimacy. Make them jump through hoops others don't even see. But now he saw it. All of it. Clearly. That evening, as dusk settled over Stonebrick Meadows, Derek stepped outside with beer in hand. Not for the alcohol, but for the image, calm, present, unbothered. From the edge of his driveway, he spotted her again. Glenda, standing with a man in a polo shirt and khakis, clipboard in hand, speaking in hushed tones. She gestured toward Derek's house, her lips moving in fast, precise patterns. The man nodded, scribbling something into a small notepad. Derek didn't look away. He didn't hide. He just took a slow sip of his drink, letting the cold hit the back of his throat while his eyes held steady on her. She wanted a reaction. He gave her stillness. And that was infinitely more dangerous, because that's when she realized he wasn't leaving. The next letter arrived on a Wednesday. No envelope this time. Just a crisp white page folded once, slid under Derek's front door with the kind of quiet aggression only paper could deliver. He picked up slowly, already knowing what it was. The title was bold and accusatory. Violation, notice number 006. Subject, porch furniture noncompliance. Your current outdoor seating does not meet the Stonebrick Meadows HOA aesthetic standards as outlined in Section 7.2a. Patio furniture should reflect the uniform elegance of the community. Plastic or wicker furnishings are strongly discouraged. Derek stared at the words, then turned to glance through the living room window. His front porch sat calm and picturesque. 2 wicker chairs and a small round glass table. Clean, simple, tasteful. He had picked them out himself from a boutique shop in Denver, with cushions in muted gray and navy tones. There were no cracks, no stains, no neon colors, no plastic anywhere. And yet, here it was, another absurd citation. He opened the notes app on his phone and started typing. Violation number 6. Porch furniture too wicker. Can't make this stuff up. He took a breath and let it out slowly, fingers tightening around the edge of the paper. This wasn't about furniture. It never had been. By now, Derek knew the pattern, knew the rhythm. A letter every 2 to 3 days. Each one targeting some invisible, moving standard. Each one worded just ambiguously enough to make arguing back seem petty. But Glenda wasn't just playing small. She was playing smart. She was death by paperwork. Death by dignity cuts. He stepped outside, coffee mug in hand, and let his eyes wander across the neighborhood. Slow, careful, like a man tracing something invisible. And then he started to walk. 1 block, then 2. As he strolled down Stonebrick Lane, Derek passed porches littered with violations far worse than his, but untouched by enforcement. One house had a faded plastic picnic table warped by sun damage. Another had 3 different chairs, none matching, one zip-tied together. There was a bright orange cooler doubling as a footrest on someone's porch. And then, the piece de resistance, a reclining lawn chair with duct tape on the armrests, slumped sideways like it had given up hope in 2012. Derek took photos of all of them, every angle, every timestamp. He moved to the lawns next. A dozen homes had untrimmed grass pushing 5 inches, crabgrass growing like wildflowers. One lawn had an entire dead patch, yellow as desert sand, and no violation notices in sight. Not a single one. Back home, Derek stood at the edge of his own yard, freshly cut just 2 days ago. Edges sharp, lines neat, green like a catalog. He had done everything right. Still, they called him wrong. The next morning, he received violation notice number 007. Subject, Lawn maintenance reinspection. Although recent maintenance was noted, your grass continues to exceed the uniform length regulation of 3.5 inches. Non-compliance will result in escalating fines. That's when something snapped. Not rage, not yelling, but precision. That evening, Derek created a folder labeled Selective Enforcement, Stonebrick HOA. Inside it, he filed over 30 time-stamped photos of other porch setups, GPS data and image comparisons of lawns taller than his. A full log of every violation he'd received, neatly organized, dated, and annotated with photographic counter-evidence. Then he wrote an email, not to Glenda, but to the full HOA board, to whom it may concern. Attached is a documented collection of violations that appear inconsistent with the enforcement history at my property. I would like to request a formal review of compliance standards across Stonebrick Meadows, as well as clarification on the process for issuing notices. Please consider this a request for board response within 10 business days. Respectfully, Derek Cole, 414 Stonebrick Lane. He clicked send, then leaned back in his chair. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't threatening. He was documenting the one thing HOA boards fear more than noise. The next morning, Derek heard voices outside. Through the blinds, he saw Glenda standing at the end of his driveway, clipboard in hand, arms crossed, lips pursed like she was sucking on a lemon. Beside her was a tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, scribbling something into a notebook. Stephen Reynolds, HOA vice president. So, she had brought backup. Derek opened the front door and stepped outside with deliberate calm. Morning, he said coolly. Glenda didn't answer. Stephen offered a tight nod. Mr. Cole, we received your email. Glad to hear it, Derek replied. Didn't expect a house call so soon. We're reviewing your concerns, Stephen said, avoiding eye contact. In the meantime, Glenda wanted to follow up on your porch. She can speak for herself, Derek said. The tension cracked like dry leaves underfoot. Glenda cleared her throat. Your porch furniture is still in violation, and your lawn remains outside the acceptable range. Derek smiled. Not kindly. I've read the HOA handbook front to back, he said. There's no line stating a homeowner must replace furniture that's in perfect condition. It's a matter of neighborhood uniformity. Glenda snapped. Ah, Derek said, tilting his head. So you're enforcing rules that don't actually exist. Stephen shifted uncomfortably beside her. For the first time, Derek saw it. Doubt, not from Glenda, but from the board. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't alone. And they knew it now, too. The email came on a Sunday night at 7:12 p.m. with a subject line that read like a veiled threat. Urgent. HOA emergency meeting. Attendance required. Derek opened the message and scanned its contents. The tone was formal, sterile, drenched in "we appreciate your cooperation" phrasing. The meeting was set for Wednesday at 6 p.m. at the Stonebrick Meadows Community Center. The agenda: ongoing compliance concerns regarding 414 Stonebrick Lane. He didn't need to guess who had written it. This was Glenda's move. Her next escalation. Corner him under fluorescent lights, surrounded by her board, and make it look like he was the problem. Get enough eyes in the room, stir up enough fear and ambiguity, and hope that Derek would fold. But Derek Cole didn't fold. He prepared. For the next 48 hours, he built a case like a prosecutor heading to trial. He printed every violation notice he had received, each one organized by date, each one annotated with photographs of comparative homes that had committed the same offense without consequence. He printed emails, HOA guidelines, highlighted inconsistencies in the handbook. He even included a color-coded chart mapping enforcement frequency by address. And at the very top of the pile, he placed 3 deeds. One for 414 Stonebrick, his home. One for 416 Stonebrick, the neighbor's property he had recently purchased as an investment. And the third for 418 Stonebrick, Glenda Cartwright's house. He slipped them into a black binder, zipped it closed, and placed it gently on his kitchen counter. Wednesday was coming, and so was a reckoning. The HOA community room smelled like lemon-scented floor cleaner and unease. A long rectangular table sat at the front, where the board members were already seated. Glenda was in the center, hands folded over her clipboard, expression blank, but eyes scanning the room like a predator pretending to be a diplomat. Stephen Reynolds, the vice president, sat to her right. He looked visibly tense, glasses sliding down his nose, fingers twitching at a stack of papers. The rest of the board filled in the empty seats, murmuring to each other in low tones. The audience was even more interesting. Neighbors Derek had never spoken to. People who hadn't returned a smile, a nod, or even a glance in the 2 weeks since he moved in. Now here whispering, watching. Some leaned in, eager for drama. Others looked uncomfortable, as if realizing they were about to witness a car crash, but couldn't turn away. Derek took his seat near the front, placed a binder on his lap, and waited. At exactly 6:01, Glenda tapped her pen against a glass and stood. "We're here to address several compliance issues," she began, her voice calm, practiced, surgically controlled. "Concerns have been raised regarding Mr. Cole's property, both in terms of repeated violations and potential disregard for community standards." She looked directly at him, a faint smirk dancing at the corners of her mouth. Mr. Cole will be given time to respond following the board's review of documentation. Derek raised a hand. "Actually," he said evenly, "I'll speak now." The room shifted. Glenda blinked. Stephen opened his mouth, hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." Derek stood up slowly, unzipped the binder, and pulled out the first page. "This," he said, holding up for all to see, "is the deed to 414 Stonebrick, filed, notarized, and recorded with the county." A few heads turned. He set it on the table in front of him and pulled out the second. "This is the purchase agreement for 416 Stonebrick, closed last month." Whispers now. Glenda's brow twitched. "And then the final page. And this," Derek said, letting the silence stretch, "is the deed to 418 Stonebrick." He paused, then added, "Ms. Cartwright's residence." The room froze. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Wait, what?" Glenda's face turned several shades lighter. Stephen's jaw actually dropped. Derek didn't sit. He let the weight of what he'd just said settle. "You've spent 2 weeks trying to run me out of this neighborhood," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "And all the while, you had no idea that I bought the foreclosure property next to mine." He stepped forward, placed the 3 deeds on the board's table. "The one you live in, Ms. Cartwright. The house belongs to me now." Gasps. Actual, audible gasps. Glenda opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Derek leaned in just enough to be heard by everyone in the room. "So, tell me, Ms. Cartwright, who's the trespasser now?" That was the moment the room shifted. Not just in volume, but in energy. Doubt crawled into the faces of the board. Neighbors turned to one another, whispering things they never would have dared say before. And for the first time since arriving in Stonebrick, Derek wasn't alone. He had facts. He had presence. And now he had the room. The silence after Derek's final question, "Who's the trespasser now?" hung in the air like the echo of a slammed door. You could almost hear people blinking. The kind of silence that followed a truth so sharp, it cut the room open. Glenda Cartwright's mouth parted, but her voice didn't follow. Her eyes flicked to the board members beside her, then back to the stack of deeds Derek had just dropped on the table. The weight of those papers was far heavier than ink and legal signatures. They carried humiliation, power shift, exposure. Derek let the silence stretch a few seconds longer. Then he spoke again. "But we're not done," he said, his voice calm, level, almost too quiet for the tension it carried. "Because this isn't just about property. This is about intent." He reached into his binder again and pulled out a second stack. He placed it gently next to the deeds. "These," he said, "are copies of the violation notices I've received over the past 3 weeks. 7 total. For everything from lawn height to porch furniture to trash bin placement." He paused, lifting the first one between 2 fingers. "This one," he said, "claims my porch light was too bright, but it's the same fixture the previous owner used for 5 years without issue." He slid it aside, picked up the next. "This one says my grass was too long. I measured it myself, 2.8 inches. Regulation is 3.5. Yeah, I received 2 warnings and a threat of fines. He let the papers fall flat on the table. I walked this neighborhood, took pictures, documented actual violations, cracked shutters, rotting mailboxes, peeling house paint, overgrown weeds, dozens of homes, not a single one with a citation. He looked directly at Glenda. Except mine. The murmurs began again, this time louder. A man from the third row leaned toward his wife, whispering something with a frown on his face. An older woman in the back folded her arms tightly, shifting in her chair like her spine had suddenly stiffened with guilt. Stephen Reynolds, the vice president, cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Cole," he said slowly, "if these documents are accurate, and they seem well prepared, I believe the board should take a closer look." Derek gave a small nod, but didn't break his gaze from Glenda. "I also received this," he said, pulling out a crisp manila envelope. "A legal notice sent from Cartwright and Mason, the firm Glenda hired, accusing me of fraudulent occupancy. An official complaint filed with the county housing authority claiming I had no legal right to my home." Gasped again. Derek held up the letter like a trophy soaked in venom. The complaint cited suspicious activity, unverified ownership, and concerns from multiple residents. He dropped it next to the others. "I'd like to know who exactly submitted those concerns." Glenda's hands clenched around her clipboard. "I was acting on behalf of the community." "No," Derek interrupted sharply. "You were acting on behalf of your bias." She blinked, audibly, as if his words had slapped the breath out of her lungs. "I spoke to my neighbors before this meeting," Derek continued. "Some of them are here tonight, and not one of them admitted to filing a concern. Not one confirmed they ever contacted the HOA. He turned to the board now, his voice gaining edge. "So, who exactly is Glenda speaking for?" Stephen sat up straighter. "Ms. Cartwright," he said carefully, "did you falsify the contents of that complaint?" Glenda's lips parted, then closed. A pause, then a weak defense. I was trying to protect the integrity of the neighborhood." He was new. People were unsettled. Someone in the audience scoffed audibly. Another voice said, "This is a joke." Derek stepped forward. This was never about trash bins or porch chairs. This was about control, about fear, about a black man moving into a neighborhood where someone like her believes he doesn't belong. He let that land. And when no one flinched, he continued, "This is harassment. This is targeted. And this," he held up one more paper, "is a list of the violations I submitted 2 weeks ago that were completely ignored by the board. Broken fences, dead lawns, real violations, all still unaddressed." He laid it in front of Stephen. Then he straightened. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equal enforcement, fairness, respect, the very things this HOA claims to be built on." Stephen looked down at the stack of evidence, then over at Glenda, who now sat motionless, the clipboard at her lap like a broken shield. Derek's voice softened for the first time. "I didn't move here to be the problem. I moved here to live, to build, to breathe. But she made me the issue before I even unpacked." A long pause followed, and then from the back of the room, a voice rose. "This is a disgrace." Everyone turned. It was Mr. Holloway, one of the longest-standing residents in Stonebrick Meadows. An older man, silver hair combed neatly, hands trembling slightly from age or maybe rage. "You really tried to evict the man who owned your house?" he said, shaking his head at Glenda. "All because he didn't fit your picture?" A ripple moved through the room like an aftershock. The balance had shifted, and for the first time, Glenda Cartwright looked cornered. The boardroom felt different now. It wasn't the lighting or the chairs. It was a silence that had switched sides. Moment ago, Glenda Cartwright had been the unquestioned authority at the head of the table, flanked by silence and complicity. Now she looked like a relic, still seated, still holding her clipboard, but no longer holding power. She shifted uncomfortably, blinking far more than she needed to. Her eyes scanned the board members, but no one would meet her gaze. Derek Cole didn't sit down. He remained standing at the center of the room, the evidence laid out before him like a closing argument. Calm, collected, deadly. Stephen Reynolds, the vice president, cleared his throat. He looked pale beneath the fluorescent lights, like someone had just told him the HOA could be liable in a lawsuit, which, in this case, was entirely possible. Mr. Cole, he began, voice low and tentative, thank you for your detailed presentation. I think it's fair to say the board has a lot to discuss. No, Derek replied firmly. We've already discussed. Now it's time to act. Stephen hesitated. And what are you proposing? Derek reached into his folder once more and pulled out one last sheet of paper, this one bearing the HOA's letterhead. This, he said, is a formal petition to remove Glenda Cartwright as president of the Stonebrick Meadows HOA. Glenda visibly recoiled. The room rippled. Even a few audience members audibly gasped. You can't be serious, she snapped, voice brittle now, no longer smooth or composed. You don't have the authority to... I don't, Derek said, turning to her. But the board does. According to Article 6, Section 2 of the HOA bylaws, any officer may be removed by majority vote for cause, including abuse of authority, discrimination, and falsification of official complaints. Stephen looked like he was chewing glass. He's right, he said reluctantly, glancing down at his own copy of the handbook. Glenda's lips thinned into a straight white line. This is absurd, she said. This is an outsider trying to hijack our community with accusations and technicalities. Derek took a step closer. I'm not an outsider, he said, slow and clear. I'm your neighbor. I own property here. 2, actually. And all I've done is ask to be treated with the same respect and fairness as anyone else. He paused, then turned back to the board. If that's too much to ask, maybe this entire board needs reevaluation. A long, suffocating silence followed. Then a voice, timid but clear, I second the motion. Heads turned. It was Lisa Hendricks, one of the few board members who had remained quiet until now. A woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and an expression that had shifted from neutral to ashamed over the last 30 minutes. Glenda's eyes widened. Lisa? But Lisa didn't flinch. One by one, Stephen muttered, wiping his glasses and looking around the table. Let's put it to a vote. The room felt like it was holding its breath. One hand went up, then another, then a third, and a fourth. By the time the fifth hand rose, a majority, Glenda was already reaching for her clipboard like it might shield her from a moment. Stephen's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. By vote of the board, effective immediately, Glenda Cartwright is removed from her position as president of the Stonebrick Meadows Homeowners Association. It was official. There was no ceremony, no gavel, just silence and the unmistakable sound of power leaving the room. Glenda sat frozen for a beat longer, her jaw tight, fingers white-knuckled around her papers. Then, like someone flipped a switch, she shoved her chair back, stood abruptly, and gathered her things. This isn't over, she hissed, not loudly, but to no one in particular. You think you won something, but this is temporary. She started for the door, but before she could leave, Derek called out gently, Glenda? She stopped without turning around. When you look back on this moment, ask yourself one question. If I had been anyone else, would you have treated me the same? There was no answer. She didn't even look at him. She just walked out. Her heels echoed across the tile, each step sounding more hollow than the last. The door shut behind her with a soft click that felt like a full stop. Back in the boardroom, the atmosphere slowly returned to motion. Someone coughed. A neighbor whispered, I can't believe that just happened. Stephen leaned back in his chair, face pale, the color returning in slow degrees. Lisa turned to Derek. I'm sorry, she said, her voice small but sincere. We should have said something sooner. Derek nodded once. I didn't come here to start a war, he replied, but I wasn't going to let someone write the rules around me and call it peace. The board was quiet now. A few nodded. A few looked away, guilt hanging heavy in the corners of their posture. Derek gathered his papers calmly, zipped the binder shut, and looked around the room one last time. Not as a guest, not as a problem, but as the man who held him accountable. The knock came 2 days after Glenda was removed from the HOA board. Not sharp and aggressive like before. This one was soft, hesitant, almost embarrassed. Derek stood in his foyer, looking at the door, coffee cooling in his hand. He hadn't expected to see her again so soon, not after the way she'd stormed out of that meeting. Spine stiff with pride, humiliation clinging to her like perfume she couldn't scrub off. But when he opened the door, there she was, and she wasn't alone. Next to her stood a man, tall, lean, early 70s, wearing a navy windbreaker and a face that looked permanently annoyed. His silver hair was neatly parted, but his posture screamed reluctance. This had not been his idea. "Mr. Cole," Glenda said, her voice tight but controlled. Derek nodded once. "Ms. Cartwright." "This is my husband, Richard." Richard gave the kind of nod people offer to strangers at funerals. A nod of acknowledgement without warmth. Derek didn't invite them in. He stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame. There was a pause. Then Glenda spoke. "I'd like to discuss the situation regarding the property." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Which property?" Glenda inhaled slowly through her nose. "My home." Derek let that word hang in the air. Like it had teeth. Technically, it wasn't hers anymore, and they both knew it. "I'm listening," Derek said. "We'd like to buy it back," she said, emphasizing the we, as though hoping the addition of her husband would make the offer more respectable. "For what you paid at auction." Derek let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, but something close. He stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed. "That's not how real estate works." "We're offering a fair deal," Richard said, finally speaking. His voice was gruff, clipped. "You got it cheap. We're just trying to correct that." "No," Derek said plainly. "You're trying to rewind time." The couple exchanged glances. Glenda's jaw tensed. Her fingers gripped the strap of her handbag a little too tightly. Derek continued, voice steady. "You lost the house because of unpaid back dues and ignored warnings. You let it go. I didn't force that. The auction was public. I showed up. You didn't." Glenda looked away. Richard stepped in again. "What do you want, then?" Derek turned his eyes to the quiet street behind them. Early morning sun bathed the sidewalks in gold. The air was crisp. It was a kind of morning that felt honest. No fog, no illusions. "I want the same thing I wanted when I moved in," he said. "To be left alone. To live in peace." But Glenda made sure that didn't happen. "I was doing my job," she snapped, a sudden, sharp break in her carefully measured tone. "No," Derek replied, looking her dead in the eyes. "You were abusing it." Silence again. A long, stiff pause. Then Glenda asked, quieter this time, "How much?" Derek didn't hesitate. "Market value, with accrued HOA debts attached. $460,000. Glenda's face paled. "That's extortion." "No," Derek said. "That's the price of a house. One that I now legally own. And you don't." Richard let out a quiet curse under his breath. Glenda turned toward him, whispering something through clenched teeth. Whatever it was an agreement. "No banks go to finance that," Richard muttered. Derek gave a small shrug. "Then I guess you'll have to find somewhere else to live." Glenda looked back at him, and for the first time, really looked at him. There was no hatred in her expression anymore. No smugness. Just a slow, aching realization that the world she controlled was now a castle of sand collapsing in front of her. "I've lived in that house for 32 years, she said softly. Derek nodded. "And yet, somehow, I still respected it more than you did." She flinched, not from the words, but from the truth of them. Richard sighed, rubbing his forehead. "We'll think about it." Derek stepped back toward the door. "Take your time." As they turned to walk away, Glenda paused. She glanced back one last time, not with venom, not with defiance, with defeat. There was something else too, not quite an apology, but maybe the start of understanding, maybe the beginning of consequence finally catching up. Derek watched her go, then closed the door behind him. Later that night, He sat on the back porch with a glass of whiskey and the deed to 418 Stonebrick on the table beside him. The same house Glenda had once ruled from. The house she'd assumed she could never lose. Now, she wasn't just off the board. She was out of time. The for sale sign went up quietly. No ceremony. No neighbors peeking through curtains. Just a plain white post staked into the front lawn of 418 Stonebrick Lane with a modest blue and white sign swinging beneath it. Available motivated seller. Glenda Cartwright never said another word to Derek Cole. There was no counteroffer. No last-minute plea. No grand apology. Just silence and a slow unraveling. Within a week of their conversation, the rumors spread to the neighborhood like pollen. The Cartwrights had been denied financing. No bank wanted to underwrite a loan at the new market value. The debt they'd ignored for years had finally come home to collect, and Derek had signed the receipt. By the third week, Glenda and Richard moved out. At night, no moving truck. No goodbye. Just the shuffling of cardboard boxes under moonlight and the low hum of a rented van pulling out of the driveway before dawn. And just like that, Stonebrick's self-appointed queen was gone. What followed wasn't instant redemption. The neighborhood didn't suddenly transform into a warm, diverse utopia. People didn't flood Derek's doorstep with homemade pies or handwritten apologies. But they changed. Quietly. Slowly. Genuinely. Some neighbors continued to keep their distance, too ashamed to face what they'd allowed to fester. Others made small gestures. Awkward smiles at the mailbox. Nods during morning walks. Lawn chairs turned a few degrees closer when Derek passed by. And then came Lisa Hendricks. One Saturday afternoon, as the first buds of spring began to bloom along the sidewalks, she walked up Derek's driveway holding a plate wrapped in foil. "I know I'm late," she said, shifting awkwardly, "but welcome to the neighborhood." Derek raised an eyebrow, then looked at the cookies, slightly burned at the edges, probably from a store-bought mix. But the gesture was there. He smiled. "Took you long enough," he said, accepting the plate. Lisa chuckled. "Yeah, it did." They stood in silence for a moment. Two people with nothing in common but the same zip code and the awareness of what had nearly happened here. Then she added quietly, "I should have spoken up sooner." Derek nodded, not cruelly, just truthfully. "Guilt doesn't fix anything," he said. "But doing better? That's a start." Lisa offered a soft, almost grateful smile before heading back down the driveway. Inside, Derek placed the plate on his kitchen counter and took a bite. Too sweet. A little dry, but still better than bitterness. Spring crept into Stonebrick with a kind of poetic symmetry. The HOA board, now under new leadership, began addressing actual community issues. Broken sidewalks were repaired. A fence ordinance was clarified. People started to care about what mattered instead of measuring porch cushions and wattage. Derek, for his part, planted a dogwood tree in his front yard. Not for symbolism, not for spectacle. Just because he liked how it looked. How it grew. He watched it every morning from the porch where his so-called non-compliant furniture still stood, untouched, unapologetic. Neighbors passed by more often now. Some waved. Some stopped to ask about the tree. One kid even knocked on his door to sell him a box of chocolate for a school fundraiser. Derek bought two. One day, he found himself standing in front of Glenda's old house, still technically his, watching the real estate agent tidy up before the next showing. It would sell quickly. Good bones. Good street. Clean title. Derek wasn't in a rush. He'd already won. But as he stood there, hands in his pockets, he thought about Glenda. Not as a villain who weaponized bylaws, but as a woman who built a fortress of power from paper rules and assumptions, and never realized she'd built on sand. Power like hers doesn't disappear. It transfers. But true power, the kind that doesn't rot you from the inside out, comes from knowing who you are, standing your ground, and refusing to shrink for someone else's comfort. And that's what Derek had done. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't fought dirty. He hadn't moved. And in doing so, he made an entire neighborhood see what they refused to see for years. As the sun dipped low over Stonebrick Lane, Derek sat on his porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the wind play with the leaves of his new tree. Peace didn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it was quieter, like a black man finally able to sit outside his own home, in his own chair, sipping something cold and not being watched. Epilogue. Some people spend their lives trying to control others, believing that power comes from enforcing rules, from making people feel small, from deciding who belongs. But real power is owning your story, living your truth, and standing so tall in the face of injustice that even silence learns to speak your name. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Hit subscribe to follow more stories that challenge injustice, uplift truth, and give voice to those who refuse to be silent. Like the video if you believe dignity deserves a front porch. Share it if you think more people need to hear this. And drop a comment, because your voice matters too. Real stories, real power, right here